Monetary Watch is here to provide a grounded perspective on the shifting landscape of international finance and my computer, starting with a moment of honest reflection for everyone who has spent years navigating this complex environment. If you have been following these developments for any significant length of time, you are intimately familiar with the unique weight of the waiting process and the endless cycle of questions that seem to follow every minor update. Specific kind of exhaustion that comes from seeing a flicker of movement only to be met with a week of total silence, or perhaps worse, flood of contradictory information that leaves you struggling to separate reality from the surrounding noise. Acknowledge that experience right at the outset, because understanding the psychological toll of this journey is essential for maintaining the clarity required to analyze these events objectively. Today is not to add to the existing claimer, but to offer a space where we can look at the actual data points and policy shifts that define the current state of Iraqi monetary reform, currently observing a distinct transition in the narrative, though it is not the dramatic or immediate shift that many of the more sensationalist outlets tend to broadcast whenever a new rumor surfaces. In this community, there is a recurring energy that suggests a resolution is always just hours away, yet serious and grounded observers recognize that meaningful change is rooted in institutional behavior and legislative progress rather than internet rumors. On this channel, we prioritize a look at political movements, diplomatic signals, and the behavior of major financial institutions over the typical contact chain. Whispers that often dominate the conversation, entirely upfront about the fact that I am not here to offer a guaranteed timeline or to claim that a secret event has been confirmed behind the scenes. Instead, at the structural reality of what has moved and what remains stationary, you with a clear and honest picture of the variables that actually matter for the future of the Iraqi dinar. Most intriguing developments this week does not actually originate in Iraq, but comes from reports circulating within analyst circles focused on Vietnam and its internal financial reforms, who track the Vietnamese dong alongside the dinar. The current climate in Vietnam is characterized by what many are calling a significant and rigorous anti-corruption campaign. This effort is reportedly involving a comprehensive review of major infrastructure projects and a systemic push to identify and eliminate financial waste within the government's budget. Perhaps the most critical piece of this reporting involves the tightening and control of currency circulation within the country. It rarely happens by accident and usually signals a very specific set of policy goals. When a sovereign nation moves to strictly control its currency supply, it is often a precursor to broader monetary adjustments or an attempt to align the local system with demanding international standards. Implications of these Vietnamese reforms are particularly notable when you consider the suggestion that Iraq and Vietnam may be operating on roughly parallel or even coordinated timelines. There is a persistent theory among some researchers that we are witnessing an internationally coordinated monetary adjustment designed to minimize global market disruptions by aligning the shifts of multiple currencies. The idea of the IMF or the World Bank overseeing a synchronized transition is logically grounded in how global monetary policy functions. It is vital to treat this specific coordination claim with a high degree of caution. Extraordinary claims regarding global coordination require extraordinary evidence, and at this moment, working with observations and patterns rather than confirmed diplomatic directives. What we can say with certainty is that both nations are undergoing intense internal financial scrutiny and reform under the watchful eye of the same international regulatory bodies. Shifting our focus directly to the Middle East, a very pointed and public statement has emerged from Washington that carries significant weight for anyone tracking the progress of Iraqi sovereignty. State's government has recently issued a vow to utilize all available tools to curb activities that are seen as destabilizing to the internal environment of Iraq, specifically focusing on the influence of neighboring Iran. In the world of high-level diplomacy, the repetition of specific phrases across multiple official outlets is never a coincidence. It is a deliberate method of communicating resolve to both allies and adversaries. When phrases like all available tools are deployed, they carry a historical subtext that includes everything from targeted economic sanctions and financial restrictions to diplomatic isolation. This is a formal precursor to more direct action. The current status quo regarding external interference in Iraq's financial and political systems is no longer being tolerated by the international community. Of this diplomatic pressure to the Iraqi dinar cannot be overstated, as the influence of external political factions has long been cited as a primary obstacle to the central bank of Iraq's reform goals. It is not necessarily that these external actors are opposed to Iraq's wealth, that their presence often prioritizes shadow power structures over the transparent institutional integration required for a modern economy. Factions lose their grip on the political levers of the country. The central bank gains the necessary room to execute its mandates without the constant threat of political sabotage. Therefore, the United States ramps up its rhetoric regarding the stabilization of Iraq's internal affairs, addressing one of the core prerequisites for the kind of monetary reform that holders have been watching for years. This is a classic case of cause and effect. Geopolitical pressure creates the vacuum necessary for domestic financial advancements to take hold. While these loud diplomatic signals are important, there's also a great deal to be learned from the periods of relative quiet that often settle over the Iraqi news cycle. This week has been characterized by a lack of splashy headlines or dramatic declarations from the central bank, leading some to assume that progress has reached a standstill. However, it is a fundamental principle of monetary psychology that silence and inactivity are not the same thing. In fact, significant financial adjustments in history are rarely telegraphed to the public in advance. If a major rate change or a revaluation of a currency were being planned, the process of protecting that information from market speculators would be just as important as the policy itself. Institutional silence is often a defensive measure used to prevent currency traders from front-running a government's decision, meaning that a lack of public buzz can actually be a sign of a highly controlled and serious professional environment. Most credible frameworks for understanding the potential shift of the Iraqi dinar is that such an event would likely occur with very little advanced warning, standard procedure for sovereign rate adjustments. Rather than a long build-up of public announcements, the history of monetary reform suggests that a clean and fast official statement is the more probable path. I mention this not to generate excitement, to help you reframe how you interpret the quiet periods that can otherwise feel discouraging. The absence of noise does not mean the absence of movement. Often, critical work is being done behind closed doors specifically so that the public does not see it coming until the moment of execution. Understanding this allows you to maintain a steady perspective even when the news cycle seems to have dried up, recognizing that the internal machinery of a central bank operates on its own schedule and its own rules of confidentiality. This week also brought a significant update regarding the religious calendar in Iraq. Supreme religious authority in Najaf officially announcing the beginning of the month of Ramadan. This announcement usually triggers a wave of speculation within the community, with many assuming that all financial and political reforms must ground to a halt during a period of religious observance. However, history provides a very different perspective on this matter. It is important to use documented facts to correct these common assumptions. A primary example is the 1991 revaluation of the Kuwaiti dinar, which remains one of the most significant currency events in the history of the region. In that year, Ramadan began on March 17th, and the revaluation was officially executed on March 24th, just 1 week into the holy month. This historical precedent proves that religious months do not freeze the economic or sovereign activities of a nation. From the Kuwaiti example is that while the cultural and religious significance of Ramadan is immense, it does not serve as a legal or institutional barrier to monetary reform. Governments and central banks continue to function, and if the conditions for a policy shift are met, those institutions will act regardless of where they are on the lunar calendar. It does not guarantee that a shift will happen during this specific Ramadan. It firmly rejects the idea that the window is automatically closed for the next 30 days. By looking at history, we can see that significant announcements and decisions have been issued during periods of observance in the past, meaning the timing remains open for debate among serious analysts. It is always better to rely on these historical anchors than to follow generalized assumptions that do not hold up under scrutiny when compared to previous regional events. The convergence of these signals, the reforms in Vietnam, the US pressure on regional influence, the strategic silence, historical context of timing, we see a picture of several interdependent variables moving simultaneously. The thesis of the current situation is that while the conditions for reform may not all be perfectly aligned at this second, they are actively trending in a direction that favors a resolution. This is not about a single event, but about the gradual building of pressure and the removal of obstacles that have hindered the central bank of Iraq for over a decade. The landscape of Iraq is particularly vital in this regard, as monetary policy and government leadership are structurally connected in ways that are unique to the Iraqi system. Happens in the halls of parliament and within the Prime Minister's office has a direct and measurable impact on the central bank's ability to function independently. This brings us to the ongoing discussion regarding Nouri al-Maliki, a former prime minister whose influence has been a persistent factor in Iraqi politics for 20 years. Reports this week suggest that Maliki is still actively seeking a path back to significant power, maintaining his long-standing alignment with external political interests that are often at odds with the goals of the international financial community. Potential return of such a figure is being closely monitored by global powers, as his leadership style has historically been associated with the kind of instability that central banks try to avoid. Central Bank of Iraq to execute a major currency reform, predictable and institutionally a grounded environment where international partners feel confident in the long-term direction of the country. Shift toward factions that prioritize external loyalties would create the kind of friction that makes reform significantly more complicated to implement. However, there is a reason for cautious optimism in the latest reporting, as there are indications that the domestic support base for Maliki may be shrinking as alternative political directions emerge within Iraq. Reports suggest that even groups previously aligned with his faction are beginning to distance themselves in favor of candidates who carry less geopolitical baggage and are more focused on Iraq's integration into the global economy. If this trend continues, it suggests that the political environment is becoming more favorable for the central bank to complete its mission. While these are developing reports and not yet set in stone, to a movement away from the status quo of the last several years. A shift in the political center of gravity is often the quiet precursor to the kind of institutional stability that allows for major sovereign decisions to be finalized and announced to the world. For those who have been holding onto their positions for years, watching these political and economic signals from afar can be an emotionally taxing experience. It is important to remember that your persistence is not a sign of being missiled, but rather a reflection of your commitment to understanding a very real process of institutional transformation. Reform process is not a myth. It is a documented reality supported by the IMF, the World Bank, and the US Treasury, all of whom have regularly acknowledged the progress being made by the Central Bank of Iraq. The debate has never been about whether Iraq is reforming, specific timing of when that reform will translate into a change in the exchange rate. Timing is the most difficult variable to predict because it depends on dozens of moving parts, oil revenue and liquidity controls to international diplomatic relations and internal security. A most productive thing any holder can do right now is to stay grounded in the underlying fundamentals rather than chasing the daily fluctuations of the rumor mill. Structural change on this scale does not happen according to a schedule posted on a forum. It happens when the groundwork is complete and the political environment allows for the risk to be managed. You have stayed the course because you recognize the potential of an emerging market that is currently undervalued due to years of conflict and external pressure. Pressures begin to lift and the institutional framework matures. The signals for change become more constructive. This is the perspective we maintain at Global Monetary Watch. Prioritize the long-term structural reality over the short-term emotional highs and lows that often distract from the actual data. We must also address the recurring reports regarding redemption centers and the alleged instructions given to financial personnel to report for duty at specific times. This week has seen a resurgence of these claims, suggesting that some sort of imminent exchange activity is being prepared for behind the scenes. While these reports certainly generate a lot of excitement, it is important to handle them with a high level of professional skepticism based on the history of such claims in this community. These reports are almost always contact-based, meaning they come through a chain of people rather than from an official, verifiable source with the authority to confirm such activities. In the past, similar rumors have circulated many times without resulting in the predicted outcome, which is why a responsible observer should always treat them as unverified until an official announcement is made. Approach to these rumors involves noting the information without allowing it to dictate your financial or lifestyle decisions. If you build your expectations around an unverified claim, risk of emotional devastation if the timeline passes without resolution. Instead, keep your focus on official sources like the central bank or major licensed financial institutions, only entities with the power to confirm a change in the exchange process. Rumors are designed to create a sense of urgency, but in the world of high finance, urgency is rarely a good basis for a plan. By maintaining a high skepticism threshold, you protect your peace of mind and ensure that you are making decisions based on facts rather than the noise of the community. If and when a change occurs, The official channels will make it known. Your previous preparation will serve you much better than a week of speculative excitement. Bringing all these elements together, we can see a clear picture of what this week's developments actually represent in the broader context of the Iraqi dinar. We have the parallel reform efforts in Vietnam, the increasing diplomatic pressure from the United States to stabilize the region, and the historical reality that religious calendars do not prevent monetary action. We also see a political landscape in Iraq that is in a state of flux, with the potential for more stable leadership to emerge as the influence of older, more polarizing factions begins to wane. All of these factors are converging to create a more constructive environment for the central bank of Iraq to operate within. While this convergence does not mean a resolution is guaranteed tonight, mean that the structural prerequisites for change are being addressed more aggressively than they have been in recent memory. The takeaway for you today is to remain in a state of steady preparation rather than one of hyper-vigilant anxiety. Being prepared means having a clear understanding of the assets you hold and why you held them in the first place, also having a general plan for how you would navigate an exchange process if the opportunity arose. It means avoiding the trap of checking for updates every 20 minutes and instead focusing on high-quality, grounded analysis that looks at the big picture. This journey has always been about a long-term position in a country undergoing a massive sovereign transformation, and that kind of change is rarely linear or predictable. By staying connected to the reality of the situation, you ensure that you are ready for whatever comes next without being worn down by the constant cycle of hype and disappointment. Demonstrated a great deal of patience and commitment by following this story for as long as you have, and that dedication is what separates the serious observer from the casual speculator. The ability to sit with uncertainty while continuing to gather and analyze information is a rare trait, and it is the very thing that will serve you best as we continue to watch these signals develop. Looking at a situation with real institutional and geopolitical weight, not a fantasy or a get-rich-quick scheme. The underlying signals are real, the international support is documented, pressure for reform is mounting. As long as you stay focused on those core truths, you can navigate the noise with confidence and clarity. You are making your own informed judgments based on the best available evidence. Global Monetary Watch will continue to monitor these developments with the same commitment to neutrality and factual accuracy that you have come to expect. Keep an eye on the central bank's communications, the political shifts in Baghdad, and the diplomatic maneuvers in Washington to provide you with a comprehensive view of the landscape. Priority is to give you a framework for understanding these events so that you can make sense of the world without being overwhelmed by it. There is no substitute for steady, calm analysis. Proud to be a part of your information routine as we walk through this process together. The road to reform is often long and winding. It is also filled with clear indicators for those who know where to look and how to interpret them. As we move forward, I encourage you to maintain your focus on the structural developments we discussed today, from the regional anti-corruption efforts to the historical precedents for monetary shifts. These are the anchors that will keep you steady when the rumors start to fly and the headlines become confusing. Remember that you are watching a nation rebuild itself from the ground up. Process is one of the most complex tasks a government can undertake. Your role is to remain informed, prepared, and grounded in reality, trusting in the fundamentals that brought you into this space in the first place. This is a journey of endurance as much as it is one of information, and staying mentally and emotionally resilient is a key part of your strategy. Thank you for your time and your trust today as we unpack these complex topics. There are many places to find information in this community, but your presence here suggests that you value a more measured and analytical approach to the news. That is exactly what we aim to provide every single time, ensuring that you leave with a better understanding of the global monetary landscape than you had when you arrived. Your support helps us continue this work and reach more people who are looking for clarity in a sea of speculation. We are in this together, watching the signals and waiting for the conditions to reach their natural conclusion. In conclusion, signals we are seeing this week are a reminder that the world of international finance is constantly moving, even when it feels like nothing is happening. The pressure is building, the obstacles are being challenged, and the historical context suggests that the possibilities remain open. Stay calm, stay prepared, and keep your eyes on the data that truly matters. Has been Global Monetary Watch, providing you with the insights you need to stay ahead of the curve in a rapidly changing world. forward to continuing this conversation with you as new information comes to light and the story of the Iraqi dinar continues to unfold.